Starting with Nigeria, Nigeria has been rocked by days of nationwide protests over police brutality, following widespread claims of kidnapping, harassment and extortion by a controversial police unit known as Special Anti-Robbery Squad. United States on Thursday condemned the excessive use of force by Nigerian military on unarmed protesters. Counselor of the U.S. Department of State met with Nigerian Vice President in Abuja to raise U.S.'s concerns about the ongoing violence. According to Amnesty International, at least 12 people were killed by the Nigerian forces in a brutal crackdown on protesters on Tuesday. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, in a statement, has asked for an immediate investigation on the horrific violence. Meanwhile, Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari on Thursday called on protesters to stop demonstrating and engage with the government to resolve the conflicts. During his address to the nation, Buhari also called on the international community, who expressed their concern over Tuesday's brutal crackdown, to know all the facts.
I therefore call on our youth to discontinue the street protests and constructively engage government in finding solutions. Your voice has been heard loud and clear, and we are responding.
Gunshots were fired and smoke was seen blowing from a prison in central Lagos as fresh unrest rocked Nigeria's biggest city after the shooting of protesters. At least 56 people have died during the 2 weeks of widespread demonstrations. In the last couple of days, the protests in Nigeria have taken a violent turn. On Wednesday, mobs vandalized and burned police stations, courthouses, TV stations, all in response to the brutal crackdown. The #EndSARS protests began amid calls for Nigeria's government to close the police special anti-robbery squad, known as SARS, but it has now become a much wider demand for better governance in Nigeria. Our correspondent Phil Ihaza is joining us live from Abuja now. Thank you so much for joining us, Phil. There have been calls by the government to hold talks to resolve the conflict. Why then do you think the protests still have taken such a violent turn? Phil, can you hear me? We seem to be having a problem with that line. We will try to get Phil back on the line, but till then, we would once again like to remind our viewers that Nigeria has been rocked by days of nationwide protests over police brutality. As you know, this started with the EndSARS campaign, but has now become about demand for wider governance-related issues. Now, following widespread claims of kidnapping, harassment and extortion by a controversial unit known as Special Anti-Robbery Squad, Nigeria has been witness to days of protests over police brutality. And even the United States on Thursday condemned the excessive use of force by the Nigerian military on unarmed protesters. Now, Counselor of the United States has met with Vice President of Nigeria to raise U.S.'s concerns about this ongoing violence. According to Amnesty International now, at least 12 people were killed by the Nigerian forces in a brutal crackdown on protesters on Tuesday. And even U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, in a statement, has asked for an immediate investigation into this incident. Now, we're trying to get Phil back on the line. Phil, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. So what I was asking you was, there have been calls by the government to hold talks to resolve the conflict. Why do you think still the protests have taken such a violent turn?
Well, thank you. So originally the protest started peacefully, thousands of people having calling for an end to years of police brutality, which mainly there's a unit that has been accused of carrying out such acts of extrajudicial killings, extortion, armed robbery, rape, and etc. So, and that unit is called SARS, the Special Anti-Robbery Squad. So that's what started the movement peacefully. The government even at some point had to scrap the unit and replace it with another one, the Special Weapons and Tactical Unit. But the people are insisting that even in the midst of the protest, we're still seeing pockets of police brutality, and so they refuse to let leave the streets. They continued their calls and demand for the protest, and even increase their demands to justice. That's insisting that the government prosecute rogue officers, compensate victims of police brutality, and of course reform the entire police by improving their welfare and all of that. But at some point the protest began to affect citizens, and the government came out to say that, look, what they're asking for would take time. They needed to stop the protest, and then all of a sudden thugs began to hijack the protest. We're not sure who exactly sponsored the thugs to take over the protest, and we're seeing pockets of violence which has escalated. On Tuesday, in fact, that was the height of the escalation of violence, where thousands of protesters were at a toll gate called Lekki, a toll gate at a Lekki area in Lagos State, and we got social media videos revealing how that men in military uniforms opened live ammunition at the protesters, killing at least 12 and injuring many others.
Yes, also there is now pressure from the United States too. How do you see this panning out?
Well, indeed, there's been pressure from the United States, from the United Nations, and quite a number of international agencies, foreign governments, on the Nigerian government to investigate these acts of violence that escalated, especially on Tuesday up until now. But a statement from the Nigeria's president when he had a live broadcast to the nation just yesterday, it was a bit sad for many that he didn't mention specifically the killings at Lekki tollgate, but he reiterated the fact that police brutality is something that the government was going to pay attention to, and so for now he has asked for the protesters to stop the protest. He's asked for calm by thugs, and also says that foreign governments should get their facts right before they make any form of declaration about what is going on in Nigeria. That's the position of things.
Yes, and also the protests have now, as you know, become about a much wider demand for better governance. What are the reforms that people are actually looking at, apart from calls to close the police special anti-robbery squad?
Well, of course, we've seen the protest snowball into not just a demand for end to police brutality. Some people are beginning to ask for better governance, better accountability, and all of that. But the government has said that the protest at that point is beginning to have some kind of political interference undertone from political sponsors wanting to hijack the country or end this administration. That's the position of the government, and so protesters are having to back down from such calls and just stick to what originally started the agitations in the first place, which is an end to police brutality. But lots of states and state governments have had to impose a curfew on their states to try to maintain law and order, and so the protest we're beginning to see is reducing to a large extent, especially in those violent prone areas like Lagos State, Abuja, and a couple of others.
Yes. All right, Phil, thank you so much for joining us with all those details.